Hello, my name is Michael Rosenblatt, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to the Galien Foundation Week of Innovation webinars, which are taking place in New York and virtually. The objective of the week is to provide content and background for our largest annual event, which is the Prix Galien USA Awards, which are going to be held on Thursday in the evening in New York and virtually. And that's in conjunction with our Galien Forum, which brings together top scientific experts and leaders in global health in a forum type of format. Because the mission of Galien is innovation to improve the human condition, we've developed this new webinar series to give our nominees in three categories: best pharmaceutical, best biotech, and best medtech products, greater visibility in describing their journey of medical discovery. We have a record number of nominations this year for the awards, 67 nominees in total, and they span three categories from 54 companies and 13 diverse therapeutic areas, ranging from cancer, cardiology, neurosciences, to infectious disease and very rare diseases. And we're looking very closely at products in all of these critical areas throughout the week. And actually, we're going to be adding a new category, that of digital health, which has 8 nominations. Today's webinar is one of 10 webinars that are being held prior to the Thursday Galien Forum, and then the evening event where the winners in each of these three categories that I mentioned are going to be announced. The 10 webinars are going to drill down on the different therapeutic focus of the products, the quality of the science behind them, and most important, what's the patient clinical impact. And it's intended to give our award attendees, the media and the public, a fuller picture of what is the innovation behind the new discoveries. I and my fellow members of the awards committee decided to arrange each of these three webinars into specific therapeutic drug segments. There's rare genetic disorders, then there's another group, cancer, rare conditions, and vaccines, and the third one, which is chronic diseases. And today's webinar that we're about to embark on is in this final category of chronic diseases. We have 7 nominees, and the banner across the panel is "Where is the growing science and its link to basic human biology, leading us in terms of new treatments for patients with unresolved chronic conditions?" And by increasing the therapeutic competition, despite the increased therapeutic competition, chronic disease remains a major opportunity for the biotech industry. There's such a tremendous rise of irreversible degenerative conditions associated with the rapidly aging population around the world. According to the CDC, chronic ailments account for 75% of the US health expenditure. So finding new treatments to avoid hospitalization and disability is one solution that the biotech industry can work on. So let's look at what are some of the questions that we can ask. And first, I want to introduce our panel. We've got a really distinguished panel, and they are each going to be speaking about really tremendously exciting innovations. I'm going to tell you the product, the name of the presenter, and their title and company. So the first is Liletta, and that we're going to hear from Jessica Grossman, who's the CEO of Medicines 360. Then we'll hear about Veneti from Panda Motsepe Ditshego, and she's the executive medical director in the bone area for Amgen. Then Amovig and Sen Chu the executive director also at Amgen, but in the field of neuroscience. M. Gallaty, Eric Perlman, the Senior Medical Director of Neuroscience and U.S. Medical Affairs in that area for Eli Lilly will speak to that. Tremfya Dan Kua from Lilly, who's the Vice President and Pathway Area Leader in the IL-23 area. Rebelsis, and that's going to be Mads Fredrik Rasmussen, who's the Corporate Project Vice President at Novo Nordisk, and Dupixin and Marcy Rudy, who's the Strategic Program Direction Leader in Immunology and Inflammation at Regeneron. I'm going to, in a moment, tell you the questions that I have asked the panel to address, but I want you to just take a minute while all this is going on. In the background, we're going to put up a poll right now, and sometime in the next 5 to 10 minutes, please fill out that poll. It's a set of general questions. They're not specific for this particular panel, but they're of great interest to the Galien Foundation in terms of our planning so that we can always be aligned with the topics of greatest interest to our audience. So I've asked each panelist who's going to speak for 5 minutes the following 3 questions. Why did your company choose to focus on the disease states and indications associated with the product you'll present? How significant was the level of unmet medical need? That's question 1. Number 2 is there a measurable impact that you can cite on clinical outcomes for patients with this product? And what's been the response of clinicians to the product thus far? And then the last question is, what were the challenges your company confronted in going along from early proof of concept to human trials and ultimately to approval? Are there lessons learned that you can share with us that would give your colleagues or the public better understanding of the medicine innovation process? So I'm going to now turn to each panelist in order, just so the audience realizes we're not going to stop for Q&A after each individual presentation. We're going to run through them. Unfortunately, there's no time to interrupt, but when we've done that, I'll have an opening question or 2, but we will turn to the audience and hopefully have about 10 minutes for you to ask your questions. So as you're hearing the presentations and you have a question, write it down and we will come back to it later in the hour. So I'm going to begin with Liletta, and I'm going to ask Jessica Grossman to speak about that.
Thank you, Dr. Rosenblatt. My name is Jessica Grossman. I'm the CEO of Medicines 360. We're a nonprofit pharmaceutical organization. And as Dr. Rosenblatt alluded to, our product is called Liletta. It is a 52 milligram levonorgestrel releasing hormonal IUD that's approved for 6 years of contraceptive use. And although reproductive health is not a chronic disease, it is a consideration for most women for the majority of their lives. Most women are trying to avoid an unintended pregnancy for up to 3 decades of their lives. And 99% of all women have been on birth control at some point. So we think it's a really important product and product area to focus on because birth control options can be really important for women. Medicines 360 was formed in 2009, and we chose to focus on the disease state because of the idea that access to high quality and effective contraceptive methods should be equitable for all women. At that time, about 10 years ago, nearly half of all of US pregnancies were unplanned, and there was only one hormonal IUD on the market, and it was highly priced. And we found that young women, women of color, and those of lower incomes were particularly impacted with disproportionately high numbers of unplanned pregnancy rates in those groups of women. And these women could also not afford the steep cost of the most effective birth control methods. And that was all in the pre-ACA area. So that was really the unmet medical need that we were going after, is the high cost and inequity around contraceptive methods and the most effective methods. In terms of your second question, what impact have we had? We have been really excited since we've been on the market. Over 500,000 women have received our product, and about a third of those women are of lower income. And we've also been really fortunate in that we've been able to really change some of the practice parameters of physicians. For example, before our product and our clinical study, physicians were oftentimes waiting to insert IUDs because of different practice parameters around sexually transmitted infection testing. And we set out to change that and really prove that oftentimes that waiting period was unnecessary. In terms of challenges confronted when transitioning from early stage to later stage, once we got FDA approval, and lessons learned, I think one of our biggest challenges was in trying to do things differently and in trying to reach all women and reach physicians, not only around the country, but around the world. I think it was just much harder than we thought it would be, and to try to tell our story when there was an entrenched market competitor. But we really set out to prove with our large clinical study that there is long-term safety and efficacy of hormonal IUDs, and that this type of product works in all women, young women, older women, women with high BMIs, etc. So we've been really excited and lucky to have our product out on the market, and we're thrilled to be here with you all as part of the Galien events.
Jessica, thank you very much for that really interesting presentation. I'm now going to turn to Panda Motsepe-Ditshego, and she's going to speak about Evenity.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to join the panel. My name is Panda Motsepe-Ditshego, as mentioned, and I'm the Executive Medical Director for our bone franchise at Amgen. I would like to talk to you today about osteoporosis and our drug Evenity. So globally, osteoporosis affects over an estimated 200 million people. And in the US alone, 10 million Americans suffer from osteoporosis. We also know that data shows that 1 in 2 women over the age of 50 will suffer in the US or will break a bone due to osteoporosis during her lifetime. It's a serious condition. It is often known as a silent disease, and unfortunately, osteoporosis has no cure. Breaking a bone can be a life-altering event that can lead to pain, loss of mobility, and really change in lifestyle. So the FDA approval of Evenity last year in April has presented a very important opportunity, but also an important therapeutic development for patients who need a medicine that can increase bone mineral density and help reduce the risk of future fractures within 12 months. Knowing the prevalence of osteoporosis and the potential impact of a fracture, we at Amgen are very proud to provide physicians with a new treatment option for managing their patients. And now, with more than a decade of bone research experience, I can say, that Amgen remains as committed as ever to osteoporosis patients and the greater community. So that really addresses why we chose to focus on this disease area and what the level of unmet medical need is. Moving on to the measurable impact and what's been the clinical response. Evenity's development program had about 19 clinical studies, and we enrolled about 14,000 patients. Evenity, as I mentioned before, was approved last year in the US to treat women with postmenopausal osteoporosis that are at high risk for fracture or fracture based on the results of 2 phase 3 studies, FRAME and ARCH. And these studies really significantly showed that Evenity significantly reduces patients' risk of osteoporosis related fractures, and with bone mineral density increases at the lumbar spine, total hip, and femoral neck. So really, we believe this has been addressed by introducing Avinity. Challenges, like many of my colleagues around this virtual panel would probably agree, it's a challenge to bring a drug to market. It's a very complex process that takes hard work, that takes resilience and dedication. Translating science to medicine is a process that requires a collection of very diversified specialities. And it often takes hundreds, if not thousands, of people to bring a medication to market. So for us here at Amgen, the 20-year journey stretching from sclerotin's discovery to Avinity actually being approved highlighted the challenge of a drug discovery when starting with a complex novel gene and unknown biology. But nonetheless, we've persevered and we recognize that there's always challenges. And we're really happy that today we have an option for patients as well as physicians to help manage their patients with postmenopausal osteoporosis. So I think I've addressed the 3 questions. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
That's terrific. Thank you. Before I introduce the next candidate, I'm going to now close the poll and hope that we'll have some results for you by the end of the session. And now let's move on and hear about Aimovig from Sen Xu at Amgen.
Hi, thank you very much, Dr. Rosenblatt. Again, I'm an executive director at Amgen, and I'm here to tell you about migraine and Aimovig. So Aimovig was approved by FDA in May 2018 and about EMA in July 2018 for the prevention for migraine. Amgen is a value-based company deeply rooted in science and innovation to transform new ideas and discoveries into medicines for patients with serious illnesses. We sought unmet need in migraine prevention with no recent innovations for over a long period of time. And migraine is a disease that impacts millions of people in the United States. However, even though it's such a common disease, it remains underdiagnosed and undertreated. We wanted to make a significant impact on people who live with migraine and provide them with different treatment options to help them. Prior to FDA approval, there were more than 3,000 patients had participated in registrational trials of Aimovig across 4 placebo-controlled phase 2 and phase 3 clinical studies, and their open-label extensions. Aimovig has been proven to reduce monthly migraine days, with some patients achieving a 50% reduction for more. That is a substantial reduction for people who, for example, were experiencing 25 to 30 migraine days per month. We've heard from many physicians the value that Aimovig has brought to their patients. In fact, we hear from so many physicians every day about how Aimovig has been a game changer to their practice and for their patients. It's incredible to think how thousands of patients, actually thousands of physicians, have now prescribed more than 1 million Aimovig prescriptions to over 440,000 patients. We've also heard directly from many patients how much Aimovig has changed their lives. With fewer monthly migraine days, they're now able to spend more time doing what they love and with the people they love. People now have more time to dedicate to things that matters the most to them, such as their families, friends, and work. With regard to challenges for how to discover these molecules, as Panda mentioned earlier, bringing the drug to market is a complex process that takes really a lot of hard work, dedication, and resilience. We have to be responsible for patients. Translating science into medicine is like a recreation process that requires a collection of very, very diversified groups of expertise. It took us from 2007 to 2018, over 11 years, to bring Aimovig from concept generation to launch. This was the first medication Amgen pursued in neuroscience also. We had to pull in experts along the way to make this happen. We worked together with one goal in mind: find a prevention treatment that can help the millions of people who live with this disease so they can get back to spending time doing the things they love. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And I just want to remind people in the audience that you can list your questions on the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and I will be able to pick them up as we go along so we can save them throughout and get to them during the Q&A session. So now let me turn to presentation by Eric Perlman about Emgality.
Well, thank you, Dr. Rosenblatt, and to the Galien Foundation. And it's my honor to get to represent Emgality, which is another in the class of CGRP monoclonal antibodies, approved for the preventive treatment of migraine, as well as the treatment of episodic cluster headache. And Eli Lilly and Company had been focused on preventive and acute migraine treatments for many years before initiating work on the CGRP antibody research effort that ultimately resulted in Emgality. The focus on migraine treatments was based on the high number of patients that were not receiving maximal benefit and or could not tolerate the adverse effects associated with current therapies. Migraine is the most prevalent disabling neurological condition, the third most common disease worldwide, and affects up to 1 in 7 people. To put this in context, migraine is more common than diabetes, epilepsy, and asthma combined. Migraines associated with high levels of disability and financial burden on society worldwide, with an economic impact of $13 billion annually in the US. Severe migraine attacks are classified by the World Health Organization as among the most disabling illnesses, comparable with dementia, quadriplegia, and active psychosis. Advances in the understanding of the biology of migraine, along with biotechnological advances in developing therapeutic antibodies, made it possible for the development and subsequent approval of galcanezumab, designed specifically to bind to the CGRP peptide and inhibits its ability to bind to its receptor as a preventive treatment for migraine in adults. Emgality has been well accepted in the clinic and is now one of the leading treatments for the prevention of episodic and chronic migraine. As I've mentioned, it's also the only approved CGRP monoclonal antibody for the treatment of episodic cluster headache, a related severe condition. For example, in our phase 3 clinical trials, more than a third of patients with episodic migraine treated with Emgality 120 milligrams achieved 100% response or no migraine attacks for at least 1 month of the 6-month treatment period. Overall, the introduction of the CGRP monoclonal antibodies has already had an impact on the disease. In our recent study called Overcome, which is a population-based real-world study of real-world use, over 75% of people taking calcitonin gene-related peptide monoclonal antibodies for the preventive treatment of migraine reported their migraine as better overall since starting the medication. The Emgality program represents an important demonstration of the boundaryless innovation we champion at Lilly. Emgality was not the first CGRP antibody advanced by Lilly. Multiple antibodies were brought forward and found to have shortcomings. When preliminary studies showed Emgality to have promise in migraine and possibly other pain conditions, Lilly moved the project forward in a partnered research plan with partial venture capital funding. This type of work allows us to maximize our ability to develop important early phase compounds. This work led to the finding that Emgality had strong efficacy in migraine and led to a focused and efficient phase 3 development program. This very successful effort shows that partnered efforts are often critical in the fast and effective development of new medications in today's world. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to represent Emgality.
Thank you, Eric. That's terrific. We're right on schedule, even a little earlier. So I'm going to move on to Tremfya, and Dan Kua from Lilly is going to present.
Thank you for the introduction. And I really am honored here to represent Janssen Research and Development to talk about Tremfya. I am a little bit unique here because I was part of the team that originally discovered IL-23 and the Th17 immune pathway 20 years ago. And I witnessed the progression of this having an idea of a immune regulator, targeting an immune regulator, and bringing that idea all the way to patients. Today, Tremfya is able to treat 90% of the patient, 90% of the psoriasis patient with 90% improvement. And that is remarkable. And we are also bringing this medicine to many other inflammatory indications. There is actually a huge opportunity here to serve many, many patients. There are more than 60 million people diagnosed in just US, Canada, Japan, and the major European countries. Imagine that, 60 million people with these huge inflammatory conditions that include psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, psoriasis, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, systemic lupus, lupus nephritis. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And when we first discovered IL-23, we thought of perhaps this key inflammatory pathway that controls many, many autoimmune conditions. And I think that we are on the way to prove that there's one drug that potentially can affect many diseases in a broad patient population. So, as I've already mentioned, we and others have demonstrated that targeting IL-23 is able to block psoriasis. Up to 90% of the patients actually have 90% PASI clinical improvement. And this compound, when given to patients, has the potential to affect many different inflammatory conditions across many different tissues. It affects the joint tissues. It affects gut tissues, such as in Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And it affects skin tissues in diseases such as HS, hidradenitis suppurativa, and then it affects multiple tissues in systemic lupus nephritis. So this targeting this immune pathway actually has proven to be extremely beneficial across many disease conditions. So the last thing I want to mention is that what is the future for these kinds of targeting these kinds of immune pathways. And one of the most compelling sort of a future direction is combination therapy. Okay, Janssen has already brought anti-23, which is Tremfya, to combine it with anti-TNF, which is Galien. Imagine putting these two powerful, combining these two powerful immune pathways to treat diseases such as psoriatic arthritis and ulcerative colitis. Many patients up until now, even though they are responding to anti-TNF treatments, anti-23 treatments, so on and so forth, but perhaps only half the patient in these more difficult diseases are responding. So Janssen wants to lead in the idea of combining these powerful biologic drugs and bring these combination drugs to patients to really improve their clinical response. So I think that is the future. I'll just stop here and hope that you have questions for me later.
Dan, terrific. And I owe you an apology. My background sheet gave you the wrong company affiliation.
That's okay. Yeah, I'm from Janssen, not Eli Lilly.
And it was really a pleasure to see what Janssen's accomplished. So my apology for the incorrect introduction. So let's move now to Rebelsis, and Mads Frederick Rasmussen will be presenting that.
Thank you, Dr. Rosenblatt, and thank you for the opportunity from you and the Galien Foundation to represent Rebelsis, or oral semaglutide. I'm Mads Rasmussen, and I've been part of the development journey for this product since its inception. So we have, as I'm sure many of you are already aware, a presence within diabetes and a commitment to change the lives of patients living with this condition. More than 400 million people across the globe live with diabetes, and more than 25 million in the US alone, driving up costs exceeding more than $300 billion per year in the US. Much of that burden is associated with the diabetes complications, including impact on cardiovascular disease, the most important cause of mortality in people with diabetes. Despite having numerous treatment options available, achieving glycemic targets remains elusive, and there has actually not been substantial improvements of the proportion of people achieving targets over the past couple of decades. One innovation, namely GLP-1 receptor agonists, have been developed and are now included in treatment guidelines across the globe, recognizing that they reduce hyperglycemia, lower body weight, and improve cardiovascular risks. But we know from our many years of work within diabetes that patients prefer tablets and delay the initiation of effective treatments administered by injections. Peptide orally administered have long been acknowledged as you could say, a holy grail within the field of drug development, and has actively been pursued since the discovery of insulin. Rebelsis has already been extensively investigated in a large phase 3A program, the so-called Pioneer program, where we included close to 10,000 patients across 10 trials. It has demonstrated significant reductions in A1C and body weight, and showed better glycemic control than all the included oral glucose lowering therapies, and demonstrated efficacy comparable to the injectable GLP-1 receptor agonists. And consistent, even more importantly, consistent with the cardiovascular risk reduction demonstrated with the injectable version of semaglutide, we've also seen a favorable cardiovascular profile for Rebelsis. These data have been recognized as scientifically important and have been published in high impact journals, and have been included also in treatment guidelines from both the American Diabetes Association and the European Society for Cardiology. And most importantly, Rebelsis is already being broadly prescribed due to the clinical benefits of the GLP-1 receptor agonists. What I'd like to close on is, I think, the most important aspect of this fantastic product, namely that this is the first oral biologic that's been developed. It has taken you could say, a long-term strategy and investment on behalf of Novo Nordisk, and has required the unique capabilities across our value chain to work closely together. Identifying the ideal tailored GLP-1 receptor molecule, a uniquely matched absorption enhancer that we've licensed from an external company, and manufacturing technology and deep GLP-1 biology insights that have allowed us to optimize this product. So the development of and approval of Rebelsis actually paves the way for new oral formulations of other peptide medications, not only within diabetes, but potentially across the treatment cascade. We see more and more peptide-based treatments having advantages over small molecule drugs. And we hope this innovation can just be the first step towards a much broader application of peptide administered orally. So thank you for the opportunity to represent Rebelsis and this fantastic innovation.
Thanks very much for that presentation. Thanks, Mads. And now we'll move on to the final of the formal presentations, and it's on Dupixin, and Marcy Ruddy from Regeneron will give that presentation. Marcy.
Thanks, Mike, and it's my privilege to talk about Dupixin today. What is Dupixin? It's a human, fully human monoclonal antibody that inhibits signaling of the IL-4/13 proteins. And the data from our clinical trials have demonstrated that IL-4 and 13 are key drivers of what we call type 2 or allergic inflammation that play a key role in a multitude of atopic diseases. Thus far, dupilumab has gained approval for the treatment of atopic dermatitis, asthma, chronic rhinosinusitis with nasal polyps, and we have ongoing studies in a multitude of other allergic diseases, including recent data that we mentioned. We had in a press release on some early data from our phase 3 program in eosinophilic esophagitis. The question that you posed to us is, why did our companies get involved in these targets? And the story of Dupixin actually goes back many, many years to our chief scientific officer, George Yancopoulos, and his work in the lab with Fred Alt and Bill Paul years and years ago, when they really were doing pioneering work in B cells and what drove the differentiation of the variable genes segments for immunoglobulin class switching. This led to a fundamental understanding of how these genes worked and a fundamental platform innovation that had been then applied to Regeneron, which was our VelocImmune mice, which has a humanized immune system, allowing for the generation of fully human monoclonal antibodies. In addition to that, this discovery helped understand the class switching that occurs in immunoglobulins to IgE, which is fundamental to allergic diseases. And this was then discovered by them to be driven by IL-4. So IL-4 was known and was a very interesting target throughout the industry for treatment of allergic diseases. And I think one of the lessons that we learned, and we all learn in drug discovery, is how important it is to understand the biology. There were failures along the line, many companies trying to target IL-4 and showing negative results. It was only until the appreciation of that blocking IL-4 with its sister cytokine, IL-13, where we led to dramatic breakthroughs in the treatment of allergic diseases. So it was with the blockade of the IL-4R receptor, which blocks both IL-4 and IL-13 signaling, which resulted in breakthrough efficacy for this pathway. And I think that's one of the important lessons that Regeneron maybe could teach the whole community about understanding the science. Thus far, the impact of Dupixin, we have over 190,000 patients on Dupixin for the treatment, as I mentioned, of atopic dermatitis, asthma, CRS with NP. And our clinical data showed dramatic improvements, for example, in the skin disease, marked improvement in EASI scores, in lung function, in asthma, as well as improvement in asthma attacks or exacerbations. And in CRS with NP, marked improvement of the upper airway blockade that inhibits patients' ability to smell and also worsens lower airway disease of asthma. So, so I think that that's really one of the things that we've learned in the development of Dupixin, is really follow the science, not be discouraged by other failures, but really know your compound and follow the development. We look forward to exploring other allergic diseases as well, and hope to bring other indications forward for this product.
Thanks, Marcy. That was terrific. I think all of us can see the just tremendous breadth of biotech innovation currently across all of these therapeutic areas, often in areas that we don't think are the target areas for the biotech industry. And I can't help but thinking as I listen to these presentations, many of you highlighted how long it actually took to go from the initial scientific insights to having a product. And I think that's something that's unfortunately not well understood by the public, nor by the politicians who can generate policies that affect us. You know, I'm thinking of the President of the United States who said that certain drugs are a miracle. Well, you know, a miracle is something that's unexpected, that seems to drop out of the sky and has great benefit. Well, all of these programs are actually well orchestrated, follow pathways, even when they're charting new territory, and require a concerted effort and focus for a long time. You know, just to give equal time, and Joe Biden describes this as a moonshot, but you know, this is much harder than a moonshot. A moonshot, if you collected a group of engineers and you gave them the resources, you could send a rocket ship to the moon with high probability of success. And all of you have talked about some of the ups and downs in development and failed previous candidates. So, you know, I've got some questions that I have to reserve at the end, but we do have questions from the audience. So I think I'm going to go there. And let me tell you that the first one is to both Dan and Sen, and they are, could you please comment on T-cell therapies, Tregs, versus monoclonal antibodies for specific cytokines when dealing with autoimmune disorders, including neuroscience? So, and maybe we can get a gallery view of the panelists, but Dan, would you go first on that?
Certainly. So the question is asking about a T-cell or cell therapy versus a anti-cytokine that's basically serve as a regulator or growth factor for immune cells. So one can imagine harvesting blood cells, lymphocytes from patients, and then in an in vitro environment, adding specific factor to bias the response, bias the T-cell response towards a regulatory response, enhancing factors such as transcription regulators such as FOXP3, enhancing other sort of immune modulator like IL-2 receptor driven biology, right? To give you a population of cell that you can then infuse back into the patients. And I think that is, you know, absolutely a good strategy, particularly for cancer, right? And perhaps even for certain really severe autoimmune diseases. The flip side is basically having an antibody against certain, you know, regulatory cytokines or effector cytokines, like Tremfya, like anti-TNFs, Cosentyx anti-17s, that you can directly inject into the patient, and that can then modulate and change the way that the immune system works. I think that the cytokine approach is much more broadly available, right, to the patients. It's easier to, you know, treat patients with that kinds of strategy than the cell-based strategy, which is, you know, probably more expensive and more restricted to wide range of patients.
This is a question from Scott Chandler, and Sen, the same question. We'd love to hear your comments.
Let me just focus on the neuroscience. So monoclonal antibody as a concept for treating neuroscience is quite new beyond the MS. And then the new class of monoclonal antibodies against CGRP pathway has been really adding a lot of excitement about using monoclonal antibody to treat neuroscience or neural diseases. However, between the monoclonal antibody as well as T-cell therapies, the big challenge is if you are trying to treat things behind the blood-brain barrier, then you're going to have that challenge to deliver those agents or cells behind blood-brain barrier. For the CGRP pathway treatment, we actually have the luxury of all these targets. We believe majority of or the sufficient target that the cause or the causal effect for migraine are reside outside of BBB. That's why we were able to take advantage of an antibody approach to treat migraines with CGRP pathway blocking. Overall, for the neuroscience drug discovery, for these advanced therapies that are being developed, excited, we're really closely monitoring those, but the challenge of getting behind BBB will be something that has to be overcome.
Great. Thanks. And the next is a question from Andrea Fetchko. It's a general question to anyone on the panel who would like to answer it, but we're going to begin with having Dr. Grossman address this question if possible. And it is, how can we create access to medicines for all? And of course, Dr. Grossman's focus on women's health brings a certain perspective to this. Jessica, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that that's part of the reasons that we're all here as scientists and clinicians and interested in improving the human condition. I think what's really important, and one of the things that we do, is to try to get to patients that are uninsured and not just those who have good insurance, because there's still almost 20% of our US-based population does not have insurance. And as I think all of you know, that number is rising in this pandemic time. And so we've looked at innovative approaches such as innovative patient assistance programs. We try to provide our product at an affordable price, but that also has had its own challenges, as sometimes the system is not set up to really accommodate affordable drugs and is also oftentimes set up to reward physicians in expensive drugs. So I think there's a delicate balance, because we're all doing this amazing research to help advance the science, but we want to balance that with making our medicines affordable and accessible to patients.
Thank you. Do any of the other panelists have a comment they want to contribute to this question? All right. Well, then I'd like to pose a question to anyone on the panel who would like to take a crack at answering it. So you've, in most of these cases, defined whole new pathways into meeting unmet medical need. And I'm wondering if you foresee, now that we understand who is likely to get a particular disease more and more on a genetic basis or phenotypic profiling, we can predict with a probability that there are certain subpopulations likely to go on and get a disease in a couple of years. Do you see an opportunity to move into the state of pre-disease for pharmacological agents in the field that you're on? If you see that, I'd love to hear from you. Anybody on the panel, just raise their hand and I'll call on you to answer.
I actually have some sort of experience in that concept, and that's basically disease inception, right? You want to be able to treat patients and prevent the patient from getting the disease in the first place. And Tremfya uniquely, not only does it work in autoimmune diseases, it's one of the few ideas that you could actually work in cancer in inception. right? The idea is that there are certain genetic mutations that causes chronic inflammation in the GI tract, familial adenoma polyposis, for example, right? Janssen has a trial, right? It's listed in the clinicaltrial.gov, where we are treating FAP patients with an anti-inflammatory agent to reduce polyp development. So that's very exciting, right? Where you know that by reducing inflammation, you can actually treat and prevent disease development. I think that's where medicine really needs to go next.
Terrific. Marcy, I think I saw your hand up.
Yes, thanks for the question, Mike. You know, it's an exciting area. Obviously, when you go from the known to the unknown, there's some risks associated with it. But with Dupixin, we've given a lot of thought to that concept, in that we know that there's so much allergic disease and it's increasing in incidence around the world, and that there's certain children very, very early that have certain markers of potential for developing multiple allergic diseases, the so-called atopic march. And so we've been working with the NIAID on concepts of how we might be able to introduce Dupixin early, very early, into babies that are at high risk, with the potential to modify an atopic march profile. As we're now studying in babies the treatment for atopic dermatitis, we'll learn more about, you know, the treatment profile, the safety profile in that age group. And then we are looking to understand whether we can modify the course of an allergic process over time to hopefully maybe prevent the occurrence of some of these other atopic diseases such as asthma, food allergies that plague these children.
Great. Anyone else put their hand up for this? Oh, Eric, please.
Well, Mike, I work in pain, and so we're not really pre-treating a disease, but we do know with many pain conditions that in a certain percentage of people, they will progress to more severe pain or more frequent attacks or more frequent migraine. And so we know that early intervention can help to mitigate that transformation that occurs. And so, you know, pain is a very complex neurobiologic condition. It involves peripheral nervous system, central nervous system, rudimentary pain processing sensory pathways to complex executive functioning all factor into pain. And clearly, especially in the US, there's a huge unmet need, just with the opioid crisis, pointing out the need for sort of new and innovative pain treatments. And so being able to get innovative treatments to people early in the course of their disease is going to be important to prevent the progression of disease and reducing stigma around diseases like migraine and other pain conditions so that patients are willing to speak up and ask for treatments, educating healthcare providers about the best way to intervene and manage diseases early, and not necessarily in a specialist office, but in a primary care setting as well is all critical. And so at Lilly and obviously at my partner companies here, we're all very interested in improving the lives of people with these diseases, and not just in making innovative medicines, but helping advance the frontiers of science and the education of medicine so that patients can get to treatments early.
Thanks, Eric. Final answer from Mads.
So thanks. Of course, much of what we do in treating diabetes or cardiovascular disease, hypertension, is reducing risk. And some of these risks, of course, don't always occur at a very frequent rate. So I think we still have a lot of work to do in better identifying those at particularly high risk who would benefit from our treatments. We, of course, also have a role in diabetes or in obesity management, trying to prevent some of the complications there. And there we're really stepping in at a very, very early stage. And we're hoping that by collecting biosamples and better understanding the biology, that we'll better be able to predict who will meet some of those serious risks.
Terrific. Well, we only have a few minutes left, and we still have a few things to accomplish. First of all, I think everyone in the audience can see what a difficult challenge the award selection committee is going to have with such great innovations that have made it to patients. And I want to just congratulate all of you and the teams that you've worked on for the tremendous work you've done. It's been such a boon to patients. I'm wondering whether we have the results of the poll to share. And let's see, the question is, what's the most important single element of future global policy to advance innovations and improve the human condition? And 28% of people think it's universal access to medicines and vaccines, 28% investment in population-based primary care and prevention and social determinants of health, less 8% for empowerment of women, reproductive planning, etc. 13% for multilateral collaboration in health policy, including a return to US participation in the World Health Organization, and 26% more public trust in science. So a pretty even spread as guidance to the Galien Foundation, and we appreciate the audience doing that. So I just want to, as we close, I want to remind everybody that you will be able to see this webcast on the Galien Foundation's homepage. And then we're on Thursday is the actual forum, and followed by the awards presentations and the 2020 Vagelos Pro Bono Humanum Award. And the winner this year is Dr. William Fagey, a very famous and highly regarded public health expert. Again, thanks so much to all of you for the care and thought you gave in being able to present to us and those in the audience the fantastic work you've done. Look forward to seeing you at more Galien events. And thank you to the audience for your thoughtful questions. Okay, bye-bye all.
Thanks.
Best biotechnology product.